What if I told you that in the remote hills of Arkansas, there lived a family so cursed by their own blood that death followed them like a shadow, a family where every child born carried the mark of their ancestors' sins, and where the very thing that should have brought them together tore them apart forever? This is the true story of the Fairchild family, and I promise you by the end of this tale, you'll understand why some secrets should never see the light of day. The year was 1829, and the Ozark Hills stretched endlessly under a blood-red sunset. Jeremiah Fairchild stood at the edge of what would become his family's land, his weathered hands gripping a deed that had cost him more than money, much more. You see, Jeremiah hadn't bought this land through honest means. 3 days earlier, he'd sat across from a Cherokee elder named Running Bear at a poker table in Fort Smith. The stakes weren't just money or livestock. They were playing for sacred ground. Running Bear had warned him, "This land drinks blood, white man. It remembers every drop spilled upon it. Your children will pay for what you take today." But Jeremiah laughed. He was a man who believed only in what he could touch, what he could own. When he laid down his winning hand, 4 aces he'd carefully marked during the game, he thought he'd outsmarted an old Indian's superstitions. He was wrong. The first sign came that very night. As Jeremiah drove his stakes into the ground to mark his new property, something strange happened. Every stake he hammered down came up wet with what looked like blood, fresh blood, but there were no wounds on the wood, no animals nearby. Still, Jeremiah pressed on. He built his cabin, married a local woman named Martha, and by 1831 they had their first child, a boy they named Thomas. And that's when the curse truly began. Thomas Fairchild was born on a night when the moon hung like a wound in the sky. The midwife, an old woman named Granny Hutchins, had delivered hundreds of babies in her time, but she'd never seen anything like what she witnessed that night. The baby came out perfect in every way except one. Across his left shoulder blade, clear as day, was a birthmark. But this wasn't just any birthmark. It was shaped exactly like a handprint. Her small handprint, as if a child had pressed their bloody palm against Thomas's skin before he was even born. Martha wept when she saw it. "What does it mean, Jeremiah? What does it mean?" But Jeremiah, stubborn as always, refused to see it as anything more than coincidence. "It's just a mark, woman, nothing more." How wrong he was. As Thomas grew, strange things began happening around the Fairchild homestead. Livestock would be found dead in the morning with no signs of attack. Wells would run dry overnight, and sometimes in the dead of night, Martha would swear she could hear children crying in the woods around their cabin. But the strangest thing of all was Thomas himself. The boy seemed to attract misfortune, like a magnet attracts iron. Other children who played with him would fall ill, crops would wither where he walked, and animals would simply disappear. By the time Thomas turned 5, the Fairchild family was completely isolated. No one in the nearby settlement would have anything to do with them. They whispered that the boy was cursed, that something evil had marked him for its own. They had no idea how right they were. In 1836, Martha gave birth to their second child, a daughter named Rebecca, and just like her brother, she bore the mark, the same bloody handprint, in the exact same place. This time, even Jeremiah couldn't deny what was happening. 2 children, 5 years apart, both marked in identical ways. This wasn't coincidence, this was something else entirely, but the curse wasn't finished with them yet. As Rebecca grew, the incidents around the Fairchild property became more frequent and more violent. Neighbors reported seeing figures moving through the woods at night, small figures that looked like children but moved wrong, as if their joints bent in directions they shouldn't. And then came the night that changed everything. Thomas was 10 years old when it happened. He'd been having nightmares for weeks, waking up screaming about the other children who wanted to play with him. Martha had dismissed it as a child's imagination, but Jeremiah was beginning to suspect something far worse. On the night of the autumn equinox, Thomas didn't come home for supper. Martha and Jeremiah searched everywhere, calling his name until their voices were hoarse. It wasn't until dawn that they found him. He was standing in the middle of the old Cherokee burial ground that sat at the heart of their property, the same ground Running Bear had warned Jeremiah about 7 years earlier. Thomas was perfectly still, perfectly silent, and perfectly unharmed. But he wasn't alone. Surrounding him in a perfect circle were 7 small skeletons, children's skeletons, their bones bleached white by time and weather. And each skeleton had its left hand pressed against the ground, as if reaching for something just beneath the surface. When Jeremiah tried to approach his son, Thomas turned to look at him, but the eyes that stared back weren't the eyes of a 10-year-old boy. They were ancient, knowing, and filled with a hunger that made Jeremiah's blood run cold. "They want to play, Papa," Thomas said, in a voice that wasn't quite his own. "They've been waiting so long to play." That night, Jeremiah did something he should have done years earlier. He rode to Fort Smith and found the oldest Cherokee elder he could locate, a woman named Singing Crow, who remembered Running Bear and the poker game that had started it all. What she told him made his blood freeze in his veins. "The land your family lives on," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was once a sacred place, a place where our people would bring children who had been touched by the spirits. Children who carried marks that showed they belonged to the other world as much as this one." She explained that for generations, Cherokee families had brought their marked children to this place for a ceremony that would either cleanse them of their spiritual burden or send them to join the spirits permanently. 7 children died during the last ceremony, Singing Crow continued. 7 children who were buried in that sacred ground, with their hands reaching toward the world of the living. They have been waiting ever since for others like them, others who carry the mark. Jeremiah felt his world crumbling around him. "What mark? What are you talking about?" Singing Crow studied his face for a long moment. Then she asked a question that would haunt him for the rest of his days. "Tell me, white man, do your children bear the handprint?" When Jeremiah nodded, unable to speak, Singing Crow closed her eyes and began to rock back and forth. "Then it is too late. The 7 have chosen your bloodline. Every child born to your family will carry their mark, and one by one they will call your children home." Armed with this terrible knowledge, Jeremiah raced back to his homestead, but he was too late. Thomas was gone. Martha sat on the porch, rocking baby Rebecca, and staring into the distance with eyes that had seen too much. "He went into the woods," she said, without looking at her husband. "He said the other children were calling him. He said it was time to play." They found Thomas's body 3 days later in the burial ground, lying peacefully among the 7 skeletons, as if he'd simply laid down for a nap. There wasn't a mark on him, no sign of violence or struggle. He had simply stopped living. But the most horrifying discovery came when they tried to move his body for burial. Thomas's left hand was pressed firmly against the ground, his fingers digging into the earth as if he'd been trying to reach something buried beneath. And when they finally pried his hand away, they found that his palm was stained with fresh blood. The 7 had become 8. Jeremiah knew they had to leave. He packed up his family in the dead of night and fled west, hoping that distance might break whatever hold the cursed land had on his bloodline. For a while, it seemed to work. They settled in a small town in Texas, and Rebecca grew up seemingly normal. She was a bright, cheerful child who showed no signs of the darkness that had claimed her brother, but the mark remained. And on her 16th birthday, the calling began. Rebecca started having dreams about children playing in a forest she'd never seen. Children who looked like her, who spoke her name, who begged her to come and join their games. She would wake up with dirt under her fingernails and the taste of earth in her mouth. Martha begged Jeremiah to take the family even farther west, but he knew it was useless. The curse wasn't tied to a place, it was tied to their blood. The end came on a cold December night in 1852. Rebecca simply walked out of the house and never came back. They found her body weeks later, hundreds of miles away, in a forest that perfectly matched the one from her dreams. She was lying in a circle of 8 small skeletons, her left hand pressed against the earth, her palm stained with blood. The 8 had become 9. You might think that would be the end of the Fairchild curse, but curses, like blood, have a way of flowing through generations. Jeremiah and Martha had one more child before Martha died of grief in 1855, a son named William, born with the same cursed mark as his siblings. William grew up knowing the family's dark history. Jeremiah, broken by the loss of his other children, told him everything. About the poker game, about the Cherokee burial ground, about the 7 children who had become 9. "Maybe," Jeremiah said with desperate hope, "maybe if you know what's coming, you can fight it." But knowledge, as William would learn, was not enough. William lived longer than his siblings. He made it to 23 before the calling began. He tried everything to resist it. He moved to California during the gold rush, thinking the distance and the chaos of the mining camps might protect him. He even tried to have the mark surgically removed, but it grew back within days, darker and more defined than before. In the end, the calling came for him just as it had for Thomas and Rebecca. He was found in a grove of redwood trees, lying in a circle of 9 small skeletons, his left hand pressed against the earth. The 9 had become 10. Now, you might be wondering how we know all this, how these stories survived when the Fairchild family seemed to die out in the 1870s. The truth is, the family didn't die out. It just scattered. Before William died, he had a son, a boy named James, who was born without his father's knowledge and raised by his mother's family under a different name. James grew up never knowing about the Fairchild curse, never knowing about the mark that would appear on his own children. And so, the cycle continued. For over a century, the Fairchild bloodline spread across America like a hidden plague. Children were born with the mark, grew up experiencing strange incidents and unexplained tragedies, and eventually answered the calling that echoed in their dreams. Some families tried to break the curse through religion, others through science. A few even attempted to return to the original Cherokee burial ground, hoping to somehow appease the spirits that demanded their children. Nothing worked. The 10 became 20. The 20 became 50. And with each generation, the calling grew stronger. In 1987, a genealogist named Dr. Patricia Wells was hired by a family in Oregon to trace their ancestry. The family had been experiencing what they called unusual child mortality rates for generations, and they wanted to understand why. What Dr. Wells discovered would consume the rest of her life. She found the connection. Family after family, spread across the country, all descended from Jeremiah Fairchild. All experiencing the same pattern of children born with identical birthmarks, all losing those children in ways that defied explanation. Dr. Wells became obsessed with the Fairchild curse. She tracked down dozens of families, interviewed hundreds of relatives, and slowly pieced together the full scope of the tragedy. She discovered that the curse had claimed over 300 children since Thomas Fairchild first answered the calling in 1841. 300 children, all found in remote locations, all lying in circles of skeletons with their left hands pressed against the earth. But the most disturbing discovery came when Dr. Wells finally located the original Cherokee burial ground in Arkansas. The land had been abandoned since the Fairchild family fled in 1852. Over the years, it had been sold and resold, but no one ever stayed long. Strange incidents, unexplained deaths, and reports of children's voices in the woods had driven away every owner. When Dr. Wells finally gained permission to excavate the site in 1989, she found something that defied all logic and reason. The burial ground contained exactly 307 small skeletons, all arranged in perfect concentric circles, all with their left hands pressed against the earth. And at the center of it all was a single, larger skeleton. The skeleton of a Cherokee child who had died centuries before Jeremiah Fairchild ever set foot on that cursed land. According to Cherokee oral history that Dr. Wells painstakingly reconstructed, the child at the center of the burial ground was named Little Fox. He had been born in the early 1600s with what his people called the spirit mark, a birthmark shaped like a handprint that indicated he belonged as much to the world of the dead as to the world of the living. Little Fox had been a powerful spirit walker, able to communicate with the dead and travel between worlds. But his power came with a terrible price. Every child he touched, every child he played with, eventually joined him in the spirit world. The Cherokee elders had tried everything to help Little Fox control his abilities. They performed ceremonies, made offerings, even attempted to bind his spirit to the physical world. Nothing worked. In the end, they made a desperate decision. They would perform one final ceremony, one that would either free Little Fox from his curse or bind him permanently to the burial ground, preventing him from claiming any more children. The ceremony required 7 volunteers, 7 children who would willingly join Little Fox in death, their combined spirits creating a barrier that would keep him contained. The ceremony worked. Little Fox was bound to the burial ground, his power contained within the sacred circle. For over 200 years, he remained trapped, unable to reach beyond the boundaries of the Cherokee land, until Jeremiah Fairchild claimed that land as his own. When Jeremiah drove his stakes into the sacred ground, he didn't just claim the land. He broke the spiritual barriers that had contained Little Fox for centuries. Suddenly free but still bound to the burial ground, Little Fox began reaching out to the living world in the only way he could, through the children who carried his mark. Children who, like him, belonged to both worlds. Each child who answered his calling became part of his spiritual family, their combined power allowing him to reach further and further into the world of the living. What had started as 7 Cherokee children had grown into an army of hundreds, all bound to Little Fox's will, all helping him call more children home. Dr. Wells realized that the Fairchild curse wasn't really a curse at all. It was a recruitment drive. Little Fox was building something, gathering power, preparing for something that would require the spiritual energy of hundreds of marked children. But what? What could require such a massive sacrifice? The answer came to Dr. Wells in 1991, when she discovered a pattern in the dates of the children's deaths. Every child claimed by the curse had died on a date that corresponded to specific astronomical events: eclipses, solstices, planetary alignments. Little Fox wasn't just collecting children randomly. He was timing their deaths to coincide with moments when the barrier between the world of the living and the world of the dead was at its thinnest. Dr. Wells calculated that if the pattern continued, something significant would happen in 2012. The winter solstice of that year would mark exactly 200 years since the last Cherokee ceremony that had originally bound Little Fox. And according to her calculations, by that date, Little Fox would have claimed exactly 500 children. 500 spirits bound to his will, their combined power focused on a single goal: breaking free from the burial ground entirely. Dr. Wells tried to warn the remaining Fairchild descendants. She published papers, gave lectures, even contacted law enforcement. But who would believe such a story? Who would take action based on tales of Cherokee spirits and cursed bloodlines? As 2012 approached, Dr. Wells watched helplessly as the final children were called home. A boy in Montana, twin girls in Florida, a teenager in Alaska who walked into the wilderness and was never seen again. On December 21, 2012, Dr. Wells stood at the edge of the Cherokee burial ground, surrounded by equipment she hoped would document whatever was about to happen. She wasn't disappointed. At exactly midnight, the ground began to shake, not like an earthquake, but like something massive was moving beneath the earth. The temperature dropped so quickly that Dr. Wells's breath came out in clouds of vapor, and the air itself seemed to thicken with an energy that made her skin crawl. Then the voices began. 500 children, all speaking in unison, their words echoing from somewhere deep underground. They spoke in languages Dr. Wells didn't recognize, but somehow she understood their meaning. They were saying goodbye. The earth cracked open in a perfect circle around the burial ground, and from that crack came a light unlike anything Dr. Wells had ever seen. Not the warm light of the sun or the cold light of the moon, but something in between, something that belonged to neither world. And in that light, she saw him. Little Fox stood at the center of the burial ground, no longer the skeleton she had excavated years earlier, but a living, breathing child. Around him stood the spirits of 500 other children, all bearing the same handprint mark, all looking at Dr. Wells with eyes that held centuries of patience and pain. Little Fox smiled at her, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of all those years, all those deaths, all that accumulated power. "Thank you," he said simply, "for helping me understand." Then the light grew brighter, and Dr. Wells felt herself being pulled forward, drawn into that space between worlds where Little Fox and his spiritual family existed. The last thing she remembered was the feeling of a small hand pressing against her shoulder blade, leaving a mark that would bind her to them forever. Dr. Patricia Wells was found 3 days later by a search team, lying peacefully in the center of the Cherokee burial ground. There wasn't a mark on her, no sign of violence or struggle. She had simply stopped living. But when they moved her body for burial, they discovered something that would haunt the investigators for years to come. Her left hand was pressed firmly against the ground, her fingers digging into the earth as if she'd been trying to reach something buried beneath. And when they finally pried her hand away, they found that her palm was stained with fresh blood. More disturbing still was the birthmark they found on her left shoulder blade, a perfect handprint, as clear and defined as if it had been there since birth. The authorities closed the case as a death by natural causes, but those who knew Dr. Wells's work understood the truth. She had become part of the very curse she had spent years studying. But here's the thing that will keep you awake tonight, the thing that makes this story more than just a tale of old curses and ancient spirits. The burial ground is empty now. After December 21st, 2012, something changed. The pattern of deaths that had followed the Fairchild bloodline for over 150 years suddenly stopped. No more children born with the handprint mark. No more mysterious disappearances. No more bodies found in remote locations with their hands pressed against the earth. At first, researchers thought the curse had finally run its course. That little fox had gotten whatever he wanted and moved on to whatever comes after centuries of spiritual imprisonment. They were wrong. Little Fox hadn't finished his work. He had simply changed his methods. Instead of waiting for marked children to be born into specific bloodlines, he began creating his own marks. Children across the country started waking up with handprint-shaped birthmarks that hadn't been there the day before. Birthmarks that appeared overnight, as if someone had pressed their palm against the sleeping child's skin. And these children, unlike the Fairchild descendants, didn't have to wait years before hearing the calling. They began disappearing within days of receiving their marks. The disappearances started slowly. A child here, a child there, scattered across different states so that no one noticed the pattern. But as months turned to years, the numbers grew. By 2015, over 1,000 children had vanished without a trace, all of them last seen walking calmly away from their homes in the middle of the night, as if answering some unheard summons. But unlike the earlier victims of the Fairchild curse, some of these children were seen again. Hikers in remote areas began reporting encounters with groups of children who didn't quite seem real. Children who moved wrong, spoke in voices that echoed strangely, and always bore the same handprint mark somewhere on their bodies. These children would approach the hikers with innocent smiles and simple requests. "Will you play with us?" they would ask. "We've been waiting so long for someone to play with us." Those who agreed to play were never seen again. Those who refused and managed to escape told stories that defied belief. They spoke of children who could appear and disappear at will, who could make the forest itself shift and change around them, who seemed to exist in multiple places at once. And all of them, every single witness, reported the same thing. The children were gathering, building something, preparing for something that would require far more than the 500 spirits Little Fox had collected over the centuries. In 2018, a new task force was quietly formed within the FBI. Officially, it was called the Missing Persons Research Division. Unofficially, the agents involved knew it by another name, the Fairchild Unit. Led by Agent Sarah Martinez, a behavioral analyst who had lost her own nephew to the mysterious disappearances, the unit began tracking the pattern of vanishings across the country. What they discovered was both fascinating and terrifying. The children weren't disappearing randomly. They were being chosen based on specific criteria that had nothing to do with bloodlines or family history. Intelligence, creativity, spiritual sensitivity. Little Fox was selecting children who possessed qualities that would make them powerful allies in whatever he was planning. Agent Martinez's team mapped the disappearances and found that they formed a pattern across the United States. A pattern that, when viewed from above, looked exactly like the handprint mark that had started it all. And at the center of that massive handprint, in a remote area of Colorado that had never been fully explored, satellite imagery showed something that made the blood run cold in every agent's veins. Thousands of small figures moving in perfect formation across the landscape, too many to count, too organized to be anything natural. Little Fox's army was no longer hiding. Against all protocol and common sense, Agent Martinez convinced her superiors to authorize a reconnaissance mission to the Colorado site. A small team of agents, equipped with the latest surveillance technology, would attempt to gather intelligence on what they were dealing with. The team consisted of Martinez herself, 2 other agents, and Dr. James Whitmore, a psychologist who specialized in mass hysteria and group psychology. They approached the site on foot, using terrain that would keep them hidden from whatever was gathering in the valley below. What they saw through their binoculars defied every assumption they had made about the case. The valley was filled with children, thousands upon thousands of them, all bearing the handprint mark, all moving with the same eerie coordination that witnesses had reported. But these weren't the shambling, mindless creatures that horror movies had taught them to expect. These children were building something. Using tools that seemed to appear from thin air, they were constructing what looked like a massive amphitheater carved directly into the mountainside. The work proceeded with impossible speed and precision, as if the children shared a single mind directing their efforts. And at the center of it all, standing on a raised platform that overlooked the construction, was Little Fox himself. He looked exactly as Dr. Wells had described him in her final notes. A Cherokee child of perhaps 10 years old, but with eyes that held centuries of knowledge and power. As Agent Martinez watched through her binoculars, Little Fox turned and looked directly at her hiding spot. He smiled and waved, as if greeting an old friend. Then he pointed at her, and every child in the valley stopped what they were doing and turned to look in her direction. Agent Martinez and her team ran. They ran faster and harder than any of them had ever run in their lives, crashing through underbrush and leaping over fallen logs as the sound of thousands of small feet followed behind them. But the children didn't catch them. In fact, as Martinez would realize later, the children weren't trying to catch them. They were herding them, guiding them toward a specific destination. The team emerged from the forest at a small clearing where their vehicles were parked. But sitting on the hood of Martinez's car was a single child, a girl of perhaps 8 years old, with the handprint mark clearly visible on her forehead. "Little Fox wants to talk to you," the girl said, in a voice that carried harmonics of hundreds of other voices. "He says it's time you understood." Before any of the agents could react, the world around them shifted. The forest, the cars, the very ground beneath their feet seemed to dissolve and reform, and suddenly they were standing in the amphitheater they had been watching from afar. Little Fox stood before them, no longer the distant figure they had observed through binoculars, but close enough to touch. Around them, thousands of children sat in perfect silence, their eyes reflecting a light that came from somewhere beyond the physical world. "You've been trying to stop something you don't understand," Little Fox said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "You think I'm stealing these children. You think I'm hurting them." He gestured to the assembled multitude around them. "Look at them, really look. Do they seem hurt to you?" And Martinez had to admit they didn't. The children looked peaceful, content, more alive than many living children she had encountered. "I'm not taking them from life," Little Fox continued. "I'm giving them something better, a purpose, a family that will never abandon them, never hurt them, never let them down." He stepped closer to Martinez, and she could see the pain in his ancient eyes. "Do you know what it's like to be alone for centuries? To be trapped between worlds, unable to touch or be touched, unable to find peace? These children," he said, spreading his arms to encompass the vast amphitheater, "they understand loneliness. They understand pain. And they chose to join me, to become part of something greater than themselves. But you're killing them," Martinez said, finding her voice at last. "You're taking them away from their families, their lives." Little Fox's expression grew sad. "Am I? Or am I saving them from lives that would have brought them nothing but suffering?" He waved his hand, and suddenly Martinez could see the children as they had been before joining Little Fox's family. She saw abuse, neglect, bullying, depression. She saw children who had been failed by every system designed to protect them. "I don't force anyone to come with me," Little Fox said quietly. "I simply offer them a choice. Stay in a world that doesn't want them, or join a family that will love them forever." "But what about their real families?" Dr. Whitmore asked. "The parents who are grieving, who are searching for their children." Little Fox's eyes flashed with something that might have been anger. "Real families? You mean the families that ignored the signs of their children's pain? The families that were too busy, too distracted, too selfish to see that their children were drowning?" He gestured again, and Martinez saw flashes of the missing children's home lives. Parents who worked constantly, siblings who bullied relentlessly, teachers who dismissed concerns, friends who turned away when help was needed. "I give them what they never had," Little Fox said. "Unconditional love. Acceptance. A place where they belong." "And in return?" Martinez asked. Little Fox smiled, and for a moment he looked like exactly what he was, a child who had been alone for far too long. In return, they help me build something beautiful, something that will ensure no child ever has to feel as alone as I did. What are you building? Martinez asked, though part of her was afraid to know the answer. Little Fox turned and gestured to the amphitheater around them. A bridge, he said simply. A permanent bridge between the world of the living and the world of the dead. A place where children who don't fit in either world can finally find peace. He explained that for centuries, children like him had been caught between worlds. Children with abilities that frightened their families. Children who could see and hear things that others couldn't. Children who belonged as much to the spirit world as to the physical one. Your world calls them disturbed, troubled, different, Little Fox said. My world calls them blessed. But neither world has ever truly accepted them. The amphitheater, he explained, would serve as a permanent sanctuary. A place where such children could exist freely, using their abilities to help others like themselves find peace and purpose. But to create such a place, Little Fox continued, requires enormous spiritual energy. The combined power of thousands of willing souls, all focused on a single goal. And if we try to stop you? Agent Martinez asked. Little Fox's expression grew serious. You can't stop something that's already begun. The bridge is nearly complete. In 3 days, during the next new moon, the final ceremony will take place. After that, nothing in your world or mine will be able to close what we've opened. He stepped closer to Martinez, and she could feel the power radiating from his small form. But I'm offering you a choice. The same choice I offer every child who finds their way to me. Join us willingly and help us create something beautiful. Or, he didn't finish the sentence, but Martinez could see the alternative in his eyes. Those who opposed the bridge would be swept aside when it opened, consumed by the spiritual forces they couldn't understand or control. The team found themselves back in the forest clearing, standing beside their vehicles as if they had never left. But each of them bore a new mark, a small handprint on their left wrist that pulsed with a faint, otherworldly light. We have to report this, Dr. Whitmore said, but his voice lacked conviction. Report what? Martinez asked. That we talked to a dead Cherokee child who's building a bridge between worlds? That thousands of missing children are actually happy and safe in some kind of spiritual commune? She looked at the mark on her wrist, feeling the strange warmth it radiated. Who would believe us? And even if they did, what could they do about it? The truth was, Martinez had seen something in Little Fox's eyes that she couldn't ignore. Pain, yes, but also genuine love for the children he had gathered. And the children themselves. They had looked more content, more at peace than many living children she had encountered in her years of law enforcement. Maybe, she said quietly, maybe he's not the monster we thought he was. But Dr. Whitmore shook his head. He's still taking children from their families. He's still causing immeasurable grief and pain. Is he? Martinez asked. Or is he saving children who would have suffered far worse fates in our world? The debate continued as they drove back to civilization, but Martinez could feel something changing inside her. The mark on her wrist was warm, comforting, and sometimes she could swear she heard voices whispering to her, children's voices telling her stories of loneliness and pain that had ended when they found their way to Little Fox. By the time they reached their hotel, Martinez had made her decision. That night, Agent Martinez left her hotel room and walked into the forest. She followed the pull of the mark on her wrist, letting it guide her through the darkness toward the amphitheater where Little Fox waited. She found him sitting alone on the platform at the center of the construction, looking up at the stars with the expression of a child who had seen too much. I knew you would come, he said without looking at her. You understand what the others cannot. Martinez sat beside him, surprised by how natural it felt. Those children you've gathered, they really are happy. Little Fox nodded. Happier than they ever were in your world. Here, they are valued for who they are, not punished for being different. And the bridge you're building will ensure that no child like us ever has to choose between worlds again. They can exist in both, taking the best from each while being trapped by neither. Martinez looked around at the amphitheater, now nearly complete. The construction was beautiful in a way that defied description, as if it had been carved from the very essence of hope and dreams. What happens to me if I join you? She asked. Little Fox finally looked at her, and she saw centuries of loneliness in his ancient eyes. You become part of something greater than yourself. You help us create a sanctuary for every lost child who will ever need one. And if I don't, then you return to your world and try to forget what you've seen here. But the mark will remain, and someday, when your world has failed you as it fails everyone eventually, you'll remember this choice." Martinez felt the truth of his words in her bones. She thought about her nephew, who had disappeared 3 years earlier. She thought about all the missing children cases she had worked, all the families destroyed by loss and grief. "Will I see him again?" she asked. "My nephew." Little Fox smiled, and suddenly Martinez could see a familiar figure among the children working on the amphitheater. Her nephew, looking exactly as he had when he disappeared, but with a peace in his eyes that she had never seen when he was alive. "He's been waiting for you," Little Fox said gently. Agent Martinez's transformation was gradual but inevitable. As she spent more time in the amphitheater, she began to understand the true scope of what Little Fox was creating. It wasn't just a sanctuary for lost children. It was a fundamental change in the nature of reality itself, a place where the barriers between life and death, between the physical and spiritual worlds, would be permanently dissolved. The children working on the construction weren't just building with stone and wood. They were weaving together the very fabric of existence, creating a space that would exist in all worlds simultaneously. And Martinez found herself becoming part of that construction. Her FBI training, her understanding of human psychology, her years of experience tracking missing persons, all of it was valuable to Little Fox's grand design. She helped him understand the modern world in ways he never could have on his own. She showed him how to identify children who would benefit from his sanctuary, how to approach them without causing unnecessary fear, how to help them make the transition from one world to another. In return, Little Fox showed her wonders beyond imagination. He taught her to see through the eyes of the spirit world, to understand the connections that bound all living things together, to feel the pain and joy of every child who had ever felt lost and alone. And slowly, Martinez began to change. The mark on her wrist spread, becoming a network of spiritual energy that connected her to every other member of Little Fox's family. She could feel their thoughts, their emotions, their shared purpose. She was no longer just Agent Sarah Martinez. She was part of something infinitely larger and more important. 3 days after Martinez's transformation, the amphitheater was complete. Thousands of children filled the carved stone seats, their eyes reflecting the light of stars that seemed closer and brighter than they should have been. At the center of it all, Little Fox stood on the platform with Martinez beside him. Around them, arranged in perfect circles, were the spiritual leaders of his family, children who had been with him the longest, whose power had grown strongest through their connection to the bridge between worlds. "Tonight," Little Fox announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the amphitheater without need for amplification, "we complete the work that began centuries ago. Tonight, we open the bridge that will ensure no child ever has to choose between worlds again." The ceremony began with singing. Thousands of children's voices raised in harmony, creating a sound that seemed to come from the earth itself. The music was beautiful beyond description, carrying notes and melodies that human ears had never heard before. As the singing continued, the air above the amphitheater began to shimmer and shift. Reality itself was bending, creating a visible rift between the world of the living and the world of the dead. Through that rift, Martinez could see other children, children who had died throughout history, children who had been lost and forgotten, children who had never found the peace they deserved in life. They were all there, waiting on the other side of the bridge, ready to cross over into the sanctuary Little Fox had created. But the ceremony required one final element, one last sacrifice to complete the bridge and make it permanent. Little Fox turned to Martinez, his ancient eyes filled with sadness and love. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "but the bridge requires a guardian, someone who understands both worlds, who can ensure that it remains open for all who need it." Martinez felt a moment of fear, then understanding, then acceptance. She had known on some level that this moment would come, that her choice to join Little Fox's family would require everything she had to give. "Will it hurt?" she asked. Little Fox shook his head. "No more than being born. And when it's over, you'll be part of something eternal." Martinez stepped forward, feeling the power of thousands of children flowing through her. She could sense their love, their gratitude, their shared hope for a better world. As she reached the center of the platform, the rift above them began to expand. The bridge between worlds was almost complete, held in place by the combined will of Little Fox's spiritual family. But it needed an anchor, a guardian who would exist permanently in both worlds, ensuring that the bridge remained stable and accessible to any child who needed sanctuary. Martinez felt herself beginning to change. Her physical form was dissolving, becoming something more than human, but less than spirit. She was becoming the bridge itself, her consciousness expanding to encompass both worlds simultaneously. Through her new awareness, she could see the children on both sides of the rift. The living children who would someday need sanctuary, and the dead children who had been waiting centuries for peace. She could feel their pain, their loneliness, their desperate need for acceptance and love, and she could provide it. As the guardian of the bridge, she would be able to reach into both worlds, guiding lost children to safety, offering them the choice that Little Fox had offered her. The transformation was complete. Martinez no longer existed as a single entity, but as a living connection between worlds. She was the bridge, and the bridge was her. In the days that followed the ceremony, the world began to change in subtle but profound ways. Children who had been struggling with depression, abuse, or neglect began to report strange dreams, dreams of a beautiful amphitheater where they were welcomed and loved, where their differences were celebrated rather than punished. Some of these children simply disappeared, walking away from their troubled lives to join Little Fox's ever-growing family. But others found that the dreams gave them strength to endure, hope to continue, and the knowledge that they were not alone in their struggles. The bridge worked both ways. Children who had died tragically or violently began appearing to their living relatives, offering comfort and closure. The barrier between life and death had become permeable, allowing love to flow freely in both directions. Mental health professionals reported a dramatic decrease in child suicides. Teachers noticed that bullying incidents were dropping as children seemed to develop a new empathy for each other's pain. Parents found themselves more attuned to their children's emotional needs, as if some invisible force was helping them understand what their children truly required. The world was healing, one child at a time. Back in the FBI, Dr. Whitmore and the remaining members of the Fairchild unit struggled to understand what had happened to Agent Martinez. She had simply vanished, leaving behind only a note that read, "I found what we were looking for. The children are safe." The official report listed her as missing, presumed dead. But Dr. Whitmore knew better. He had seen the mark on her wrist, felt the strange pull it exerted. He knew she had made a choice that went beyond simple life and death. The disappearances continued, but they had changed in character. Instead of children vanishing without a trace, families began reporting that their children had simply moved on. They left notes explaining that they had found a better place, a family that understood them, a purpose that gave their lives meaning. The grief was still there, but it was tempered by a strange sense of peace. Parents reported dreams in which their missing children appeared, happy and healthy, assuring them that they were exactly where they needed to be. Dr. Whitmore found himself torn between his duty as a federal agent and his growing understanding that something genuinely positive was happening. The children weren't being harmed, they were being saved. But saved from what? And at what cost? The answer came to Dr. Whitmore in the form of a visit from his own daughter. Emily Whitmore had died in a car accident 5 years earlier, when she was only 12 years old. Her death had driven Dr. Whitmore to his work with the FBI, hoping to save other children from the fate he couldn't prevent for his own daughter. But on a cold November night, Emily appeared in his living room looking exactly as she had when she died, but radiating a peace and joy that took his breath away. "Daddy," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, "I need you to understand something." She explained that she had been part of Little Fox's family since the moment she died, that the bridge between worlds had allowed her to find the peace and purpose that her short life had never provided. "I'm not gone," she said, taking his hand in hers. "I'm just different. I exist in both worlds now, helping other children find their way to safety." Dr. Whitmore felt tears streaming down his face as he held his daughter's hand. She felt real, solid, warm, more real than she had ever felt in his memories. "The children who join us," Emily continued, "they're not dying, they're transforming, becoming something more than human, something that can exist in multiple realities simultaneously. She showed him visions of the amphitheater, now expanded far beyond its original size. Thousands upon thousands of children, all working together to create something beautiful and eternal. A sanctuary that existed in every world, every dimension, every possible reality. "Little Fox isn't taking children from life," Emily said. "He's giving them access to all possible lives. They can experience every world, every possibility, every dream they ever had." As word of the bridge spread through channels that existed beyond normal human communication, more and more children began to seek out Little Fox's sanctuary. But these weren't just troubled or abused children anymore. They were children who had glimpsed something greater than the limited existence offered by the physical world. Children who wanted to be part of something infinite and eternal. The phenomenon began to affect adults as well. Parents who had lost children to the bridge found themselves drawn to follow. Teachers who had worked with troubled children felt the call. Social workers, therapists, anyone who had dedicated their lives to helping children began to experience the dreams, the visions, the gentle pull towards something greater. Dr. Whitmore was among them. Night after night he dreamed of the amphitheater, of his daughter Emily working alongside thousands of other children to build something that defied description. And night after night, he felt the mark on his wrist growing warmer, more insistent. The choice was always the same. Stay in a world that seemed increasingly hollow and meaningless, or join a family that offered infinite possibilities and eternal purpose. More and more people were choosing the bridge. By 2020, the phenomenon had reached a critical mass. Entire communities were reporting mass disappearances, but these weren't the panicked, desperate vanishings of the early years. These were calm, purposeful departures. People left notes for their loved ones, explaining that they had found something better. They left behind their possessions, their responsibilities, their old lives, and walked into forests or deserts or mountains, following a call that only they could hear. Governments tried to intervene, but how do you stop people from choosing to leave? How do you prevent a mass migration to a place that doesn't exist on any map? The bridge had become self-sustaining. Every person who crossed over became part of its power, expanding its reach, making it easier for others to find their way to sanctuary. And at the center of it all, Little Fox continued to grow in power and wisdom. No longer the lonely, trapped child he had been for centuries, he had become something approaching a god, a deity of lost children, of second chances, of infinite possibilities. But he never forgot his original purpose. Every child who joined his family was welcomed with the same love and acceptance he had craved during his centuries of isolation. Every adult who chose the bridge was given the chance to reconnect with the child they had once been, to heal the wounds that the physical world had inflicted upon their spirits. By 2023, the world had fundamentally changed. The bridge between worlds had become a permanent fixture of reality, as natural and accepted as gravity or sunlight. Children grew up knowing that they had choices beyond the limited options offered by traditional society. If they felt lost, alone, or misunderstood, they knew there was a place where they would be welcomed and valued for exactly who they were. The suicide rate among children and teenagers dropped to nearly zero. Mental health crises became rare as young people learned that their struggles were temporary, that there were infinite possibilities waiting for them if they could just hold on long enough to find their way to sanctuary. But perhaps most importantly, the world of the living began to change as well. Parents became more attentive to their children's emotional needs, knowing that neglect or abuse might drive their children to seek sanctuary elsewhere. Teachers learned to celebrate differences rather than punish them. Society as a whole became more accepting of children who didn't fit traditional molds. The threat of losing their children to the bridge forced humanity to become better parents, better teachers, better guardians of the young. Dr. Whitmore never did cross the bridge. He chose to remain in the world of the living, serving as a liaison between the two realities. Through his connection to his daughter Emily, he was able to help other parents understand what had happened to their children, to find peace with their choices. He established a new organization, officially called the Bridge Foundation, that provided support and counseling to families affected by the phenomenon, but its real purpose was to help people understand that their loved ones weren't gone. They were simply existing in a larger, more expansive reality. The foundation also worked to identify children who might benefit from knowing about the bridge, providing them with the information they needed to make informed choices about their futures. Dr. Whitmore often thought about Agent Martinez, wondering if she was happy in her role as guardian of the bridge. Sometimes, in his dreams, he could see her standing at the center of the amphitheater, her consciousness expanded to encompass multiple realities, her love reaching out to every lost child in every possible world. She had found her purpose, just as little Fox had found his, just as thousands of children had found theirs. As the years passed, the bridge continued to grow and evolve. New amphitheaters appeared in different dimensions, each one tailored to the specific needs of the children who gathered there. Some were places of learning, where children could explore infinite knowledge and understanding. Others were places of creativity, where young artists and dreamers could bring their wildest imaginings to life. Still others were places of healing, where children who had been damaged by their experiences in the physical world could find peace and restoration. But all of them were connected by the same fundamental principle that little Fox had established centuries earlier: unconditional love and acceptance for every child, regardless of their differences or struggles. The family had grown beyond anything little Fox could have imagined when he first began calling children to join him. Millions of souls, all connected by bonds of love and shared purpose, all working together to create something beautiful and eternal. And at the center of it all, little Fox remained what he had always been, a child who had been alone for too long, who had found a way to ensure that no other child would ever have to experience that same isolation. Today, the bridge between worlds is as much a part of reality as the sun and moon. Children grow up knowing that they have options, that there are places where they will be welcomed and loved no matter what. The physical world has become a better place because of this knowledge. Knowing that they might lose their children to the bridge has forced parents and society to become more nurturing, more accepting, more willing to celebrate the unique gifts that each child brings to the world. But for those children who still find themselves lost, alone, or misunderstood, the bridge remains open. The amphitheaters continue to welcome new souls, offering them the chance to become part of something greater than themselves. And in the space between worlds, Agent Martinez continues her eternal vigil as guardian of the bridge. Her consciousness spans multiple realities. Her love reaches out to every lost child who might need sanctuary, her purpose fulfilled in ways she never could have imagined during her time as an FBI agent. The Fairchild curse, which began with Jeremiah's greed and ignorance, had transformed into something beautiful and redemptive. What started as a tragedy had become humanity's greatest gift, the knowledge that no child ever has to face their struggles alone. Epilogue. The continuing story. The story of little Fox and his eternal family doesn't end here. It continues every day, in every world, in every reality where children might need sanctuary. Somewhere, right now, a lonely child is having dreams of a beautiful amphitheater where they would be welcomed and loved. Somewhere a parent is learning to truly see their child's pain and respond with compassion instead of dismissal. Somewhere, a teacher is celebrating a student's differences instead of trying to force conformity. The bridge has changed everything, and yet nothing. Children still face struggles, still experience pain, still sometimes feel lost and alone. But now they know that these feelings are temporary, that there are infinite possibilities waiting for them, that they are part of a family that spans all worlds and all realities. And in the Ozark Hills of Arkansas, where this story began, the original burial ground remains empty. The Cherokee spirits have found peace, their long vigil finally ended. The land that once drank blood now nurtures new growth, as if the earth itself has been healed by the love and acceptance that little Fox brought to the world. Visitors to the area sometimes report hearing children's laughter echoing through the trees, but it's not the haunting sound of trapped spirits. It's the joyful noise of children at play, children who have found their way home at last. The curse that began with 7 Cherokee children has become a blessing that touches millions. What started as a story of greed and supernatural revenge has transformed into humanity's greatest lesson about the power of unconditional love and acceptance. And perhaps that's the most important truth of all, that even the darkest curses can be transformed into light if we're willing to look beyond our fear and see the pain that drives them. That every lost child, every lonely spirit, every soul crying out in the darkness is simply looking for the same thing we all seek, a place where they belong, a family that will never abandon them, a love that transcends the boundaries between worlds. Little Fox found that love, and in finding it, he created a way for every other lost child to find it too. The handprint mark that once signified doom now represents hope. The calling that once meant death now offers infinite life. The bridge between worlds stands eternal, a testament to the power of love to transform even the deepest curses into the greatest blessings. And somewhere in that space between realities, Agent Martinez continues her watch, ensuring that no child who needs sanctuary will ever be turned away. The Fairchild family curse is over. The age of infinite sanctuary has begun. In the end, perhaps that's what every ghost story, every tale of supernatural horror is really about. Not the darkness that haunts us, but the light that waits beyond it. Not the curses that bind us, but the love that can set us free. And in a world where children still face unimaginable struggles, where young souls still cry out for understanding and acceptance, the story of Little Fox reminds us that there is always hope, that somewhere in some reality there is a place where every child is welcomed home. The amphitheaters continue to grow, the family continues to expand, the bridge remains open, and the children are finally safe,